Pinch the skin on the back of your hand. That thin, hairless, barely there layer is the only insulation your species was issued. No fur, no undercoat, nothing. Now put that hand in a Siberian winter, where the air sits at -40, and count how long you last. 20 minutes, maybe, before your fingers stop obeying you. And yet, humans were living in places like that at least 40,000 years ago, not visiting, living, raising children through the dark months, hundreds of kilometers north of anywhere a naked ape has any business being. So somebody, somewhere, solved cold. Not with fur they grew, but with fur they took off something else. The trail to that person runs through a body lice genome, a bone needle from the Denisova cave, and a fat, greasy pile of ash. Let's start with the lice, because that's the part nobody expects. Here's the problem with looking for the first clothes. Hide rots, sinew rots, fur rots. Give it 10,000 years in ordinary soil, and the oldest coat on Earth is a stain. Archaeologists digging for the origin of clothing are hunting an object that has almost never survived. So, in the late 1990s, a team including Mark Stoneking at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig went looking somewhere ridiculous instead. They sequenced lice. There are two kinds of louse living on you: head lice, which cling to hair, and body lice, which do not live on skin at all. Body lice grip fabric. Their whole anatomy is built for clothing fibers, which means body lice cannot exist until clothing exists. They are a parasite that evolved to live in the world's first wardrobe. So the team dated the split between the two lineages. The estimate came back somewhere around 8,000,001,7,0,0,0 years ago, with later reanalyses pushing at both ends of that window. Molecular clocks are elastic things, and specialists still argue over the calibration. But the logic holds. Something was being worn long before anybody left a stitch behind. The trouble is, a louse cannot tell you what the garment looked like. And what it looked like probably was not a garment. Think less tailored parka, more animal draped over a shoulder and gripped shut with a fist. A cape, bison hide, horse hide, whatever died nearby that week. No shape, no fastening, no fit. You wore it the way you'd wear a rug. That sounds primitive until you try it. A loose hide traps a layer of air against your skin, and still air is one of the best insulators on the planet. That's the entire principle behind your winter coat. Goose down does nothing on its own. It just holds air still. The problem with a cape is the same one you get with a bad blanket. Every time you move, the air escapes. Bend down, reach up, run, and you pump your own warmth out through the gaps. Fine for a cool evening in Spain. Useless at -30 when the wind is doing 40 kilometers an hour and you need both hands free to butcher a reindeer. So for tens of thousands of years, humans in cold country had a coat that only worked while they stood still. Somebody had to close the gaps. Closing the gaps needs a hole. Specifically, a small, clean hole punched through hide, and something to pull through it. And there is a moment in the archaeological record where those holes start appearing. Holes come first. A bone or stone point, sharpened, used to pierce. Neanderthal sites in Europe have them going back well over 100,000 years. And at Ivory in France, researchers led by Marie Seresi recovered bone tools that look for all the world like lissoirs. Smoothers used to work hide soft and water resistant. That's around 5,000 years ago, and it is a leather-working kit made by a species we spent a century drawing as brutes. But an awl is not a needle. An awl makes the hole, and then you fight the thread through with your fingers, which works on thick hide and fails completely on anything delicate. You cannot tailor with an awl, you can only fasten. The eyed needle is the invention. Thread the sinew through the eye, and the needle pulls the stitch behind it. Suddenly hide can be cut into shapes and joined into a form that follows a human body. The oldest ones we have came out of a cave in Siberia, and they were not made by us alone. Denisova Cave, in the Altai Mountains, is famous because a finger bone from it gave us an entire unknown human population. It also gave us needles, bone needles with drilled eyes, one of them around 7 centimeters long, dated by the Russian team, working the site to roughly 4,5,000 to 5,000 years ago. Which layer belongs to which human population is genuinely contested, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Denisova's layers are mixed, and specialists have been arguing about the attribution for years. Hold that needle in your head for a second, because 7 centimeters of bone with a hole drilled through the end is not a casual object. You are grinding a splinter of bird bone or ivory down to a smooth shaft, then boring an eye through it, by hand, with stone, without snapping it. Modern experimental archaeologists have tried it. It takes hours, and you break most of them. Nobody spends hours on a needle to make a decorative cape. That needle is a survival tool for fitted clothing, and a fitted garment implies something even harder than sewing. It implies a pattern. Cut hide wrong, and it does not fit, and hide is not fabric you can buy more of. Every mistake costs somebody a hunt. So how do we know they were cutting to a plan when the clothes themselves are gone? We look at graves. At Sunghir, about 200 kilometers east of Moscow, excavators found burials dated to roughly 3,400 years ago, and the bodies were covered in thousands of ivory beads. On one adolescent, close to 5,000 of them, they were not scattered. They lay in rows across the skull, down the arms, around the ankles, in lines that trace where the seams of a garment were. That bead map is our blueprint. It describes a hood, a shirt, trousers, footwear, sewn separately and worn together, a tailored outfit in the Ice Age, on the Russian plain, and drilling 5,000 mammoth ivory beads takes an estimated thousands of hours of work. Somebody sat through an entire winter doing that for a teenager who died, which raises a colder question. What were the people who never invented needles doing? Because Neanderthals lived through European glacial cycles for something like 300,000 years, and eyed needles are effectively absent from their toolkits. They had awls, they had hide smoothers, no needles. Ian Gilligan, at the University of Sydney, has argued that Neanderthals were probably working with simple wrapped hides rather than fitted clothing, and compensating with their bodies. Their build supports it: shorter limbs, broader torso, bigger nasal apertures to warm incoming air. A body shaped like a radiator, someone deliberately made smaller. Some estimates put their resting energy needs well above ours. Here's the trade the fossil record seems to describe. Neanderthals paid for cold with calories, burning fuel to hold their core temperature. Modern humans arriving from Africa had a tall, narrow, tropical body that dumped heat, and they paid for cold with technology instead. Needles, thread, layers. One strategy required constant food. The other required a needle and an afternoon. Guess which one survived the next climate crash? But clothing alone still isn't enough, and this is where people wildly overestimate hide. A single layer of fur is worth maybe 2 or 3 kilo units of insulation, which sounds impressive until you learn that surviving -40 in still air, doing nothing, needs somewhere in that upper range, with no gaps at all. Sit down on frozen ground, and you lose heat straight into it by conduction, whatever you're wearing. Which is why the real answer to how humans survive the cold is not clothing at all. It's fire, shelter, and clothing working as one system, and if you pull any leg out, the whole thing drops. At Kostenki, on the Don River in Russia, archaeologists found dwellings ringed with mammoth bones, dated in the range of 20 to 25,000 years ago. At one structure, more than 60 mammoth skulls arranged in a circle around 15 meters across, hearths inside, bone burned as fuel, because on an open steppe with almost no trees, you burn what you kill. Picture eating dinner inside a wall of your food's relatives. Nobody in that room found it strange. And that mammoth bone tells you something about the invention nobody talks about. Burning bone is not intuitive. Bone doesn't light. But bone loaded with fat, laid on an existing fire, burns long and hot and smokeless, and the mammoth was a walking fuel depot. Analysis of hearths at sites like Kostenki and Mezerik in Ukraine shows heavy use of bone as fuel, which is a straightforward read of a hard situation. No wood, -30 outside, and children to keep alive. Now think about what that means for the clothing. A fire needs fuel, fuel needs hunting, hunting in winter needs your hands and feet to work for hours in the open. Your mittens make the hunt possible. The hunt makes the fire possible. The fire dries the mittens. There is one more piece, and it is the one that keeps killing people today. Sweat. Work hard in furs, and you soak the insulation from the inside. And wet insulation is worse than none. Arctic peoples solved this with ventilation, with removable layers, with the design of the hood itself. So the first tailor was not solving cold. They were solving cold and heat at the same time, in the same garment, on the same afternoon. And the people who solved it best left the clearest instructions. Look at traditional Inuit and Yupik winter clothing, recorded by ethnographers through the 19th and 20th centuries, and you find an engineering document, 2 layers. The inner parka worn fur side in against the skin, the outer worn fur side out to shed snow. Caribou hair is hollow, which is why it insulates better per gram than almost anything else available. Gut skin used for waterproof outer shells. Seal skin boots with dried grass stuffed inside as a wick to pull moisture off the foot. None of that is decoration. Every choice answers a specific way that a human body fails in the cold. And it was sewn with sinew thread that swells when wet, sealing its own stitch holes. A waterproof seam, invented from a tendon, thousands of years before anyone had the word waterproof. Now, the part that reframes everything. Ian Gilligan's argument, and it's an interpretation rather than a settled finding, is that clothing didn't stay a cold solution. Once you're routinely working hide into fitted shapes, you have looms and weaving waiting at the end of that road. Textiles, which means agriculture partly for fiber, not only for food. The needle may have been the first step towards the shirt you're wearing right now, and the field it was grown in. So here is what I keep coming back to. Somewhere in the Altai, or the Don Valley, or a cave nobody has dug yet, a person sat by a fire made of fat-soaked bone and pushed a sliver of ivory through a reindeer skin over and over in bad light with cold fingers, trying to make a shape that would fit a child. They were not inventing fashion. They were building a portable climate, a pocket of warm African air, 4 millimeters thick, carried north into a landscape that should have killed them within a day, held in place by nothing but stitches. Every winter coat you own is a copy of that pocket. The zip replaced the fist gripping the hide shut. The synthetic fill replaced the hollow caribou hair. The taped seams replaced the sinew that swelled shut when it got wet. Same problem, same answer, 40,000 years apart. And the reason your hand went numb when you scraped ice off a windscreen last winter is that nothing about your skin ever changed. You never grew the fur. You just got very, very good at wearing somebody else's. Somewhere under the Russian soil, there are 5,000 ivory beads still lying in the rows where a seam used to be, holding the shape of a coat that rotted away around a body that stopped being cold 34,000 years ago.